Today, we'll be focusing on the housing supply crisis that we're currently facing. This issue is critical because it affects so many aspects of our economy and daily lives, especially when it comes to affordability. We'll take a close look at the outlook for housing supply in the United States and how it impacts the ability of people to find affordable homes. This is a complex challenge, but understanding these key points will help us grasp the bigger picture. Let's dive into the details and explore what this means moving forward. Right now, the United States is facing a significant housing shortage, about 1.5 million homes short of what's needed. This gap exists because the number of homes being built is not keeping up with the growth in households. As a result, the supply is consistently falling behind the demand. Here we see a dramatic decline in U.S. housing starts, marked by a peak around 2006, followed by a sharp collapse of about 72% in the years after the crisis. Housing starts plunged from more than 2 million units annually to roughly 0.5 million at their lowest point post-2008. Although there has been some recovery since then, the annualized housing starts remain below the levels needed to close the current supply gap. This means that even today, in 2024, new housing construction is not keeping pace with demand, falling short of the pre-crisis norms. This persistent shortfall in housing supply is a key factor contributing to ongoing affordability challenges in the market. Understanding this trend is crucial because it shapes much of the housing affordability landscape we see now and influences what we can expect moving forward. Construction costs have been surging significantly, with an estimated 35% rise in home building input costs since 2020. This increase isn't just about lumber prices. It's a broad-based pressure affecting a range of materials. Alongside higher material costs, financing and insurance expenses have also climbed, making the economics of building new homes more challenging and pushing affordability further out of reach. If we look at the index trend with 2020 as the baseline of 100, we see a steady rise. Costs reached 112 in 2021, 124 in 2022, and are projected to hit 135 by 2024. This illustrates just how sustained and pervasive these cost pressures have been over the last few years. For builders, higher per-unit costs mean fewer projects meet the financial return thresholds needed to move forward. Materials continue to be volatile, freight and logistics costs remain elevated, and additional overhead from financing and compliance adds more complexity to the equation. All these factors combined are significantly impacting the outlook for U.S. housing supply and affordability. One of the biggest challenges facing the construction industry today is the labor shortage. Simply put, there aren't enough skilled workers available to meet the demand for new homes. This shortage slows down projects, drives up costs, and pushes delivery timelines further out. Part of the problem is the aging workforce. Many experienced tradespeople are retiring, and there aren't enough newcomers to replace them. Positions in framing, electrical, and spacia and plumbing remain especially difficult to fill. With fewer crews available, construction starts are delayed, build times are longer, and overall completions decrease. Ultimately, this shortage of labor is a direct barrier to increasing housing supply, which impacts affordability and availability in the market. When we look at land availability and zoning restrictions, these are some of the biggest barriers impacting housing supply. First, land scarcity is a major issue. In fact, 70% of builders report lot shortages in key growth markets. This limited developable land means that home sites often have to be pushed farther out from city centers, which drives up the costs of finished lots significantly. Secondly, zoning regulations play a crucial role, with about 75% of residential land in many metropolitan areas restricted to single-family use. This leads to Barrier 2, density caps, parking minimums, and setback rules that severely limit the supply of multifamily and starter homes, restricting diversity and availability in housing options. Finally, permitting delays present another major obstacle. It's common in high-cost jurisdictions for approval processes to take anywhere from 8 to 12 months. These long review cycles not only add carrying costs, but also create uncertainty, discouraging developers from moving forward with many projects. Together, These three barriers heavily influence the outlook for housing supply and affordability across the U.S. Here we see the median home price to income ratio, which is currently at 6.8 times. This means that buying a home now requires almost 7 years of the median household's entire income. Affordability has dropped to record lows because the gap between what households earn and what homes cost continues to widen. If you look at the trend from 2019 to today, the ratio has jumped from 4.1 to 6.8 times, a significant increase of 66%. This clearly shows a worsening affordability situation that poses real challenges for many potential home buyers in the current market. Here we see how rising interest rates create what's called a payment shock. To put it simply, even if you're looking at the exact same home, higher interest rates mean your monthly mortgage payment is significantly higher. For example, on a 30-year fixed mortgage of $320,000, at a 3% interest rate, your monthly principal and interest payment would be about $1,349. But if that rate jumps to 7%, which reflects today's higher rate market, that payment increases to $2,129. That's an increase of over $780 a month, or 58% more. This kind of jump doesn't just reduce your buying power, it actually changes the affordability of owning that home. For many first-time buyers, this increase alone can mean they no longer qualify for the mortgage they need. It's a crucial factor in understanding current challenges in the housing market. Here we see how the affordability crisis varies significantly by region across the country. The pressure isn't uniform, it's most intense along the coastal areas and in high-growth metropolitan markets. On the West Coast, places like Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, and Seattle face the highest purchase price burdens, combined with the deepest housing shortages, making prices and monthly costs especially prohibitive. Moving inland to the Mountain West, cities like Phoenix, Denver, and Boise are experiencing rapid population growth and limited housing supply, which has driven prices upward quickly. This region is in a critical state. The Midwest, including cities such as Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit, is comparatively more balanced in affordability, though rising financing costs still pose challenges for buyers. In the South, fast household growth in Sun Belt cities like Austin, Nashville, Atlanta, and Tampa has outpaced new housing supply, pushing affordability into a high-stress zone as well. Finally, the Northeast, home to older housing stock and strict zoning rules, includes Boston, New York, and D.C., where housing costs remain severely elevated due to dense job centers and limited supply. Overall, metro areas are the hotspots for affordability stress, even within regions that are generally more affordable. Major job centers consistently face much steeper affordability challenges than surrounding areas. This regional pattern underscores how supply constraints and local income levels collide to shape the housing market pressures we see today. Here we see an important trend in the housing market. Only 26% of homebuyers are first-time purchasers, which is significantly lower than the historical average of 38%. This drop is a clear signal that high home prices, a shortage of entry-level homes, and elevated mortgage rates are creating barriers for new buyers trying to enter the market. Essentially, these factors are making it much harder for first-time buyers to afford a home, which has implications for the overall health and accessibility of the housing market moving forward. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for assessing the outlook for U.S. housing supply and affordability. When we look at the rental market, one of the biggest pressures has been the significant increase in rents. Since 2019, we've seen median asking rents rise by more than 25%. This sharp increase impacts about 12 million households currently renting. At the same time, vacancy rates remain very low, around 5%, which means renters have very little power to negotiate or find affordable alternatives. This tight supply of available rental units is a key factor driving prices up. As a result, many renters are severely cost-burdened, struggling to keep up with these higher rental costs. Importantly, this pressure isn't limited to lower-income renters. The rent increases are affecting families across almost every income level. This broader impact signals a widespread affordability challenge that continues to intensify in the current market. On this slide, we're focusing on 4 key policy solutions designed to increase housing supply more quickly and at scale. First, streamlining zoning is critical. By allowing more density in high-demand markets, we can potentially double the number of lots available for development. This is a crucial step to meet growing demand efficiently. Second, reducing permitting timelines can significantly speed up the process. Moving approvals from what typically takes years down to just months can save between 6 to 12 months per project, which accelerates housing availability. Third, incentivizing construction through tax credits and specialized financing helps close the financing gap on marginal projects by about 30%, making more developments financially viable. Finally, supporting workforce development is essential to meet the labor demand in this sector. We need to expand skilled trades pipelines nationwide to fill the projected need of around 400,000 workers. Together, these levers provide a comprehensive approach to unlocking faster housing production and improving affordability across the board. Here we see a snapshot of zoning reforms happening across different states that aim to increase housing supply and affordability. These recent reforms focus primarily on allowing higher density, speeding up approval processes, and expanding by-right housing options in markets where housing is constrained. What's really notable is that this momentum for change is mostly driven at the local level, reflecting tailored responses to specific community needs. Looking at some specific examples, California is expanding accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and reforming lot splits. This is expected to add more infill housing, particularly in suburban areas around Los Angeles and the Bay Area, helping to increase supply where demand is high. Oregon has taken significant steps by legalizing duplexes and fourplexes in traditionally single-family zones. This incremental increase in density aims to support growth corridors in cities like Portland. Montana has introduced reforms such as reducing parking requirements and allowing wider by-right approvals, which should help create more affordable multifamily housing developments, especially in Bozeman and Missoula. In Massachusetts, communities along the MBTA transit lines are now required to zone for multifamily housing. This initiative is expected to bring new apartment capacity close to key transit hubs around Boston, encouraging transit-oriented living. Overall, these varied reforms reflect a growing recognition of the need to adapt zoning laws to meet housing demand, with local approaches creating pathways to more affordable and accessible housing across the country. Here we're looking at the Builder Toolkit, which is all about how we can make affordable housing projects more viable and financially attractive. One of the key strategies is using tax incentives. For example, LITC and state tax credits play a crucial role in improving the returns on affordable housing developments, making these projects more appealing to investors. Temporary property tax relief, or abatements, also help by lowering early operating costs, giving projects some breathing room right after completion. Depreciation enables faster write-offs, which supports the economics of multifamily housing and rehabilitation projects, helping developers manage their tax liabilities better. Grants provide direct subsidies that clear feasibility hurdles, while gap funding, like infrastructure and utility grants, unlocks stalled land and reduces risk in brownfield or infill redevelopment. This targeted support is essential in advancing projects that might otherwise face delays or cost overruns. On financing, bond programs and public lenders offer low-cost debt options that significantly cut interest expenses. Credit enhancements and guarantees further expand access to private capital by reducing lender risk. Revolving funds provide bridge capital, keeping projects moving smoothly through the often complicated approval process. Overall, the goal is straightforward: reduce costs, lower risks, and improve project feasibility so that more affordable housing developments actually pencil out. By layering these incentives, reducing both upfront capital needs and long-term carrying costs, we create a more robust and effective framework to encourage new construction and address the housing supply challenge. One of the most critical steps to addressing the housing supply challenge is investing in workforce development. Expanding apprenticeship and trade training programs is essential because it rebuilds the labor pipeline necessary to construct more homes efficiently. First, scaling registered apprenticeships will provide structured, hands-on training that meets industry standards, ensuring workers are well prepared for the job. Next, funding community college trade programs is crucial to expand access to skill development and provide pathways for more individuals to enter the trades. Finally, recruiting younger and underrepresented workers will help diversify and strengthen the labor base, making the workforce more resilient and capable of meeting future demand. Together, these efforts build the labor foundation that is key to increasing housing supply and improving affordability over time. When we look at the role of modular and prefab housing, there are several key advantages that really stand out. First, modular construction allows for much faster delivery because much of the assembly happens in a factory setting, which is not subject to weather delays or inconsistent labor availability. This means homes can be delivered and completed more quickly than traditional building methods. Second, this approach leads to lower waste and tighter cost control. Since components are manufactured precisely in controlled environments, there is less material waste, and budgets are easier to maintain without unexpected overruns. Third, modular housing supports scalable production, especially for entry-level housing. This is critical because it allows builders to increase output efficiently, helping to address the significant demand for affordable homes. All of these factors matter because they contribute directly to the ability to build more homes in less time, which is essential in improving the housing supply and affordability outlook in the U.S. Ultimately, modular and prefab housing represents a practical solution to help meet the growing needs of the market while controlling costs and timelines. When we look at public-private partnerships, the key idea is that housing supply improves most quickly when public incentives and private execution work hand in hand. On the government side, tools like tax credits, providing public land, and speeding up approvals play a crucial role. These incentives create an environment that encourages developers to step in. Developers bring capital deployment and efficient project delivery to the table. This collaboration leads to shared risk, which lowers costs and accelerates production. As a result, more homes can be delivered, including mixed-income units, which help address affordability. In short, the alignment between government support and private sector expertise is essential for expanding housing supply effectively. When we talk about addressing displacement and equity in housing, it's important to recognize that simply adding more housing units isn't enough if communities can't remain intact. The new supply has to be designed in a way that expands access to housing opportunities without forcing out long-time residents, renters, or lower-income households. Equity in housing means ensuring growth happens alongside stability, so the people who already live in these neighborhoods can benefit from improvements rather than being pushed out. This approach is crucial for a fair and sustainable housing future. Now let's take a closer look at two important affordability solutions: rent stabilization programs and housing subsidy mechanisms. Rent stabilization typically imposes a cap of around 2 to 5% on annual rent increases, offering strong protection for existing tenants by preventing sudden spikes in rent. This approach is especially effective in high-cost markets where rent jumps can displace many families. However, rent control works best when combined with efforts to increase new housing supply, ensuring that affordability gains today don't hinder future construction. On the other hand, housing subsidy mechanisms, such as vouchers and tax credits, aim to close the payment gap for low-income households quickly. These programs typically target around 30% of a household's income to be devoted to rent, making housing immediately more affordable. Their success depends heavily on expanding available units alongside financial support, ensuring that subsidies translate into actual housing access rather than just increased demand. Together, these solutions represent complementary strategies to address affordability from different angles, balancing tenant protections with direct financial assistance. When we look at the long-term outlook for housing supply, the key takeaway is that meaningful improvement depends on three critical reforms happening together: zoning, labor, and financing. Without progress in all these areas, supply won't increase significantly. By 2034, under an aggressive reform scenario where these reforms align, we could see an additional 1.2 million annual housing starts, compared to maintaining the status quo. To put this into perspective, the status quo scenario projects around 2.15 million housing starts annually. Moderate reform could push this to about 2.8 million, and aggressive reform could increase starts to nearly 3 million per year. Over the next decade, this translates into a net addition of 4.2 million homes if we don't make major changes. Moderate reform, with improved approvals and financing, could add 6.8 million homes. An aggressive reform driving zoning, labor, and subsidy alignment could result in nearly 9.7 million new homes. This graphically underscores the importance of comprehensive reform to close the gap in housing supply and improve affordability across the country. Without it, we risk continuing the cycle of underbuilding and rising housing costs. Here we define what success looks like for a credible housing recovery. And we do this through 4 clear targets that need to be achieved by the end state. First, we need to see housing starts reach at least 1.8 million annually. This level must be sustained to effectively close the current supply gap and meet demand. Second, the affordability ratio is critical. It should be at or below 30%. This means the median housing payment should return to a sustainable share of household income, making housing more financially manageable. Third, regional supply must improve, particularly in high-growth areas like the Sunbelt and Midwest. These regions need to add enough inventory to ease local shortages and balance supply with demand. Finally, entry-level access must increase, allowing more first-time buyers to enter the market. Starter homes and affordable rental options must become reachable again to support this group. Together, these targets provide a comprehensive framework for measuring a successful housing recovery. As we review the key takeaways, there are several critical points to keep in mind about the current housing market. First, the supply deficit is structural, meaning it's not just a temporary issue, but a fundamental imbalance that will take time to resolve. Second, affordability is at historic lows, making it increasingly difficult for many people to find homes within their budget. Third, rising interest rates are intensifying what we call payment shock, that sudden jump in monthly mortgage payments that can put homeownership out of reach. Additionally, zoning restrictions and labor shortages continue to limit the pace and scale of new construction. Finally, it's clear that policy efforts need to focus on unlocking supply at a meaningful scale if we want to improve both availability and affordability in the housing market moving forward. As we look ahead, the key takeaway is that the housing market doesn't need a single solution. It requires a coordinated effort. We need to focus on building more homes, reducing the barriers that slow down development, and ultimately restoring affordability for the next generation. The most straightforward path to achieving this is by increasing the supply of housing. There are 3 main steps to move forward. First, we need to unlock land and zoning capacity to make it easier to develop new homes. Second, scaling faster and lower-cost construction methods will help get more houses built efficiently. Third, it's crucial to target policies in areas where affordability is most strained, ensuring that resources and efforts have the greatest impact. By focusing on these coordinated actions, we can create a more affordable housing future for everyone.